Welcome to the December Innovative Cities Lecture. We're the Urban Planning Department up at School of Architecture and Urban Planning at UW-Milwaukee. And I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge in Milwaukee that we are on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of the Michigamme, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. So I want to welcome Melony and Natalia today. We're excited to hear about the progress of the Harbor District. So I'm a proud board member for many years. So I'm excited to be part of the story, but it's also important that we understand some of the measurements, the impact to making more of an equitable waterfront. So, you know, there's a working waterfront, but there's an actual gathering social element that has been one of our goals as well, to serve all the people that live and work in the neighborhood. So we have Melony with us today. She's the Planning and Development Director, somewhat new to the Harbor District, but it's been off and running, and she works with the bid as well. And Natalia is our outreach specialist, so she is working with a lot of the different residents. She's done work with local schools in the neighborhood, and they'll each tell you a little bit about their role as well as some of the progress that we've been making. So welcome. And I want to remind everybody that you can put your questions or comments in the chat, and throughout the presentation, if it's appropriate, I'll interrupt and pose the question, as well as you can add comments at the end of the presentation. So welcome.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we hope that you do keep questions coming in. Natalia and I are going to be switching back and forth a bit to keep this as conversational as possible. But yeah, by all means, throw your questions our way. With that, today, we wanted to share with you what we're going to be going over. It's important for us to make sure everyone's oriented on where we're talking about. And then we're going to go ahead and frame out the goals at the inception of the organization. Talking about then how I'll hand it over to Natalia to talk about aligning stakeholders, what it actually means to have an equitable waterfront and our goal in pursuing that, how we actually measure our progress in getting there, and then what's next for the Harbor District. So with that, there we go. We want to bring up the map and make sure we're all on the same page to understand the exact area that we're talking about. So the Harbor District itself is within the yellow boundary you see here, with three very well-established neighborhoods around it. So we've got the 3rd Ward to the north, we've got Walker's Point to the west, Bayview to the south, and of course the lake there to the east. Other things to point out here, just again to help for folks that aren't super familiar, we've got the Hone Bridge actually right here. We've got Jones Island, which is the home of the Port of Milwaukee right here. And then you'll note the Kinnickinnic rivers and then the Menominee and the Milwaukee rivers coming through, emptying out into the lake. So the Harbor District is a physical space, sometimes confused with us, Harbor District Inc., understandably. So the physical space is actually 1,000 acres and made up of 9 miles of waterfront, which is very unique for a Milwaukee neighborhood. The Harbor District Inc., we're going to talk a little bit about our staff structure and board structure later in the presentation. And then it was already mentioned that we do have a bid here. So we have a business improvement district. We are one of the 10 industrial bids in the city. And so we are bid 51, also within this yellow boundary. So that's where we're talking about. And now we want to introduce you to what it once was. So here we can see a shot of marshland. The idea of what this area was, it was actually marsh from the waterfront all the way to Miller Park, if you can believe that, quite a distance away when we think about the physical space now, and looks a little bit different. And I think that point is made even more clearly when we look at this next slide, and we can see the physical alterations of the port as we progress in time. So from the 1800s, really taking a look at, Jones Island was actually an island, taking note that later in the 1800s, we actually changed where the channel was that we get to the lake from. This eventually silted over. And then we can see what we're more familiar with today, largely unchanged from this 1984 picture here. I think the other thing that we really wanted to make sure folks understood from this is not just the alterations of, how the channel is cut and, how we can see the progression of urban development, but also the change in the natural environment. You can see the Kinnickinnic River here is actually pretty stream-like, as opposed to what you see here in the 80s, the channel that's cut through, much, much wider. Okay, I didn't know if that was a question for us. Anything else on this that we wanted to point out?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. So again, taking the time to really understand what went on here, before the Harbor District was created. This was an industrial port, so heavy uses here. Tanneries were here. We can see this middle picture here, just to give you a point of perspective. This is actually taken from essentially where we're sitting right now, which is the end of Greenfield Avenue. We're at the School of Freshwater Sciences. You can see in this picture here, all the way to the right, the last residences on Jones Island. So these were Kashub's residences. And we wanted to make sure that we really get an idea of what was happening here. So this was in the 30s, which is essentially, 100 years ago. And so this is what was going on. This is sort of the legacy that we're left with. And Natalia, I think you wanted to point out something about the change, particularly on Jones Island.
Yeah, and so Jones Island, as Melanie mentioned in our map before, it was at one point an island with that cutoff. Eventually now it's become public land through the Port of Milwaukee, so anyone really honestly is able to drive on there. The last resident left it was 1943. The last Kashub left, and the family is still around. They're still doing their thing and hosting events, and they host a picnic at the Milwaukee County's smallest park, which is right on Jones Island. And so it's really become still a memory of history, and it's been activated too.
Yeah, absolutely. So with this understanding of what it was for the last 100 years, we take a look at this photograph from 2010, which is actually taken from the Kinnickinnic River, along where we have a current development. And again, talking about what's been left. So we have this history now of foundries, tanneries, iron mills that have all closed and really contaminated the land and the waterways in a very real way. We also have a lot of outdated and, quite frankly, failing infrastructure here and within the district itself. A lot of poor access when it comes to access within the district. And so, when folks are thinking about creating the Harbor District, what really came to mind was, how do we look at this as, how can we build assets instead of leaving liabilities? What can we do in the next 100 years where we're really leaving a better legacy? So with that, we wanted to share with you some of the goals at the inception of the Harbor District and how it came to be. So you see here logos from two folks, one you're definitely familiar with, university. And the reason they're on here, well, lots of reasons, but in particular, the investment in the school that we're sitting in right now. So there was a $55 million investment into the School of Freshwater Sciences in the heart of the Harbor District. And that was instrumental in signaling to not only Milwaukee, but to the real estate community nationally and internationally that this is a place worth investing in. And so we are eternally grateful for that. You also see the logo here for Refresh Milwaukee, which is actually the sustainability department in the city of Milwaukee. And what happened here in 2013 is these folks got together with other stakeholders in the city and created a 10-year plan. Now, as you might know, sometimes these plans get made with the best intentions at heart and then sit. It was very important to the authors of this plan that there were tangible outcomes. And one of those outcomes was the creation of the entity now known as Harbor District, Inc., which we're really happy happened. So the driving forces behind this, as we mentioned, are these two folks and the stakeholders. And the real foundation under this was building mutually reinforcing ecological, economical, and social systems. This is a theme that you'll hear throughout our presentation. I'm sure you hear it in your work as well. People, planet, profit, it comes in many names, but essentially that's what they all mean, the same thing. Now, once HDI was created, A lot of work happened. As you can see here, we have a listing here of community interactions on, again, how to build a framework for this organization to move forward. I'm going to hand it over to Natalia to tell us a little bit more about that.
Some of these conversations, what came out of that was the water and land use plan. So before I get to what it actually is, the water and land use plan was an effort to get all of our stakeholders, community members, businesses, all talking about what it is that the Harbor District needs to be or should become, and the assets that we already have that should be built upon. And so that consisted of a variety of different elements, right? So we had focus groups, interviews, classroom visits, public meetings, and design charrettes, which are all kind of listed up here. What the outcome of that the water and land use plan, which you can read and access, it's on our website, is to create a unique opportunity that supports what we have here. So we have the Port of Milwaukee, right? So we still want it to be a working waterfront. We want it to be a model for a water-centric city and urban development that's walkable, accessible, and then preserve some of the history. Mm-hmm. And again, just making sure that it's a mixed use of land that is here and is still working, and we're honoring that. And then, some of the environmental improvements and making sure that our habitat and our waters are clean. Our habitat's coming back. Our animals at one point were not here anymore. It's not as often. Yeah. And so there's a lot that really, really went into that. And part of that was also creating public space, which I will touch on later on. And so this water and land use plan is a plan that we constantly go back to and make sure that we're aligning all of our work that we're doing to what was said there. And then constantly just checking back and forth and making sure that, hey, what's here is what we're striving towards in the future.
Absolutely. And so an image that we found that really encapsulates what this could be, because once we did all of this outreach, and asked folks what they wanted to see here, honestly, we got a mixture of, we want to see a little bit of everything. And so, okay, what could that look like? And so this image here, which some of you might recognize, is Sugar Beach in Toronto. And it's actually a beach here, which you can see some of the umbrellas here and some landscaping, but also what else do you see around it? So you also see not only this recreational use, but clearly commercial uses here and here, and then industrial use at a sugar refinery here, hence the name. So this image is something that we strive towards in the fact that we really want to have a true mixed use space and utilizing our waterfront in an intelligent way. And I guess the biggest thing behind that is making sure that we are honoring all of the stakeholder engagement. And so with that, Natalia is going to share a little bit more about how we align all those expectations and those stakeholders.
Yeah. Thank you, Melony. So we have this water and land use plan, and we have these stakeholders, and we have what we imagine the Harbor District to look like, or what we collectively imagine, our shared vision for the future. And so here at the Harbor District, I think we consider ourselves the conduit, or that middle person between all of the different stakeholders and entities, right? Because you have the community who's involved and interested. You have our government entities, the municipal, states, federal levels. We have developers and business owners, and even our stakeholders who don't necessarily have a voice per se. So think of our environmental elements as well. Mm-hmm. And so an important piece for us as Harbor District, the organization and the people who work, is to make sure that those stakeholders are aligned and that they're intersecting, and making sure that our interests are kind of all aligned and shared amongst each other. And so this is where HDI staff, this is where Melony and I were hired on and are doing here with the Harbor District. It's a really big project. You can't really depend on one entity that's already doing a bunch of things. So for example, if the city were to do this, they were working on so many other projects and doing great jobs in other areas. It's a lot for something, I just use a city as an example, for the city to use, mm-hmm. to do. And so when you have an entity that's specifically or concentrated on the work that goes into creating the Harbor District, I think just things work better, right? Because mm-hmm. that's what we work towards, and that's what our purpose is every day when we come into the office. We're working on Harbor District stuff. And so we are the foundation. And within our staff, we have a sphere of stakeholders that we really work with. And so, for example, our executive director, she does a lot of the, the governmental stuff and the politics that goes on into creating this. She makes sure that we have, grants and fundings for operational support. Melony, our planning and development director, works a lot with our businesses and our physical structures that are here, our business improvement district, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. Our environmental director, he works a lot with our stakeholders who deal with, bringing in our environment and making sure that we're all taken care of, because I think it was a big part, and it's a big part of our history, and it's something that we want to continue to encourage and to redevelop here in the Harbor District. And then me as the outreach manager, we have our neighborhood advisory committee and making sure that our neighbors are aligned. Our neighbors are involved, talking, understand what all the projects are that we're working on. Mm-hmm. And then you wouldn't think, our office manager, who's actually, on this call as well, and she's making sure that, hey, we're organized and we're running, and, we're having healthy boundaries within, our work-life balance. And then our operations assistants, who really is on the ground and making sure, we're creating these public spaces, these great locations. Now we have to actually take care of them, right?
Absolutely.
And then this next slide. So this is specifically the people that we go to for expertise. And so we have the Harbor District organization with its staff members. And we know that we need expertise in different areas. So we have our Harbor District governing board, and that board consists of, I believe it's 19 individuals on our governing board, and they are they have expertise in all areas, right? So we have lawyers, educators, business owners, property owners, community stakeholders, and it's just a great variety of different individuals. And then we have our business improvement district, which Melony will touch on a little bit.
Yeah, so we have a bid board made up of 7 individuals, and there are guidelines around who can be on that board, and making sure that we keep a balance of folks that actually own businesses and property within the district, but also outside of it, to make sure that we're getting that perspective outside of the district as well, to make sure that we're really keeping up with what we say we're doing.
Yep. And then we also have our neighborhood advisory committee, which I love working with, and I think they're very important. My point is always, we always ask for legal experts, and we ask for development experts, and sometimes we don't think about our neighborhood experts. And so the neighborhood advisory committee consists of about 12 members who I constantly go to for advice on best practices for engagement and project thoughts and development. And they range from residents who've lived here for a year to 35 plus years. And so they really understand the change that has gone into the Harbor District and how certain projects and elements that we're working on will affect the future of how that community and the neighborhood interacts. And they're very interested, they're very involved, and they kind of help us as well spread the word about the work that we're doing to the rest of the neighborhood, because of course me as an individual, Melony, we can't reach every single neighbor like they can.
Right. So when you put those together, you get an image of this, and we put this together because we wanted to share the idea that the staff is the foundation doing the actual work on the ground. We use our advisory boards for help all the time, and then we really all are working with our stakeholders here. And this is just a snapshot of some of our stakeholders, but it gives you idea of the breadth and depth of folks that we work with, not only on projects that we're working with, but projects that they're working on, and they are coming to us asking for help and ideas. And so that's really a huge compliment to the work that's been done here in the Harbor District. Anything else on that before we go to the next one?
No, I think just...
Okay. So one item that's foundational here is the wallop, which Natalia has touched on a couple of times. And again, making sure that we stay true to our stakeholder discussions. One of those things, one of those through lines is having an equitable waterfront. And that's what we want to talk about next.
Okay. So this word equitable waterfront, it's easy to say, but what does it actually mean? And it can mean a lot of different things to us as the Harbor District and our stakeholders, I would say as well. An equitable waterfront looks like a place that is accessible, both physically and mentally as well, where you feel invited and able to come. It's a place that honors what was here before the land was disturbed, right? So going back to the history of what was here. And then just really setting the standard for what the next 100 years will look like in a way that it's equitable, that our future generations don't have to worry about the issues that we're worrying about today.
Exactly. And I think that you spend a lot of your time, especially on the programming here, on an equitable waterfront, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I share this slide here because it's an image showing all of the use that Harborview Plaza gets. And so what Harborview Plaza is, when we did the water and land use plan, one of the first things that came out of that was people wanted more public space and access to the water. And so if you look at a map and you look at places like Brookfield or Elm Grove and kind of these outer areas, there's a lot more park space than say the inner city. And so in our planning and looking outside directly at our window, we could see, okay, well, there's this open space. There's not really anything there. It's close to the water. What can we do there? And so in 2019, we opened up Harborview Plaza. So it's a public space with a kayak and canoe launch, a water fountain, and some other water features. There's a big orange shipping container turned into a play structure that's, I think, very well known at this point. And it's really become just a great inviting space for reflection, for activities, for family time. And so I always say that this case here that although you build something, people will not always come, right? You heard the phrase, if you build it, they will come. I will tell you that's not necessarily the case.
Not always.
Especially in an area like this, where for hundreds of years it was off limits or was specifically for industry or people who are working in this area. And so what we came up with our neighborhood advisory committee, remember that group of core neighbors who really advise us, is the open pitch competition. And so what that entailed was the Harbor District sent out a request for proposals to organizations, to neighbors, asking for an event idea. What we would give them would be, of course, access to Harborview Plaza, electrical, water, anything that they really needed, plus an honorarium of $1,000 to put on this event. And so once out of the application, we got 12 back. And this was the first year we've ever done it. We didn't know how it would work. So we were very surprised to see people had interest in programming this space. And then we hosted an open pitch competition evening. And so our neighborhood advisory committee and all of our local neighbors were invited to listen in on these pitches. And then they got to select the programming or events that they wanted to be hosted at Harborview Plaza. And from that came our summer event series through all of those events that were selected, which we call Summer in La Plaza. And this was really great because this idea came up from our neighborhood advisory committee, which is, first of all, hey, if you have an idea, it shows that we're going to go ahead and do it. If it's a great idea and we know we can support it, we'll go ahead and do that. And so it's also all the programming is programming that the community would want to go to. And it wasn't just programming specifically for them. It was programming that really anyone would be able and welcome to. And that was one of the things that we put in RFP as well, is make sure that this event is free to the public and accessible to everyone. And then there was a platform for some of our smaller groups. So I always like to highlight Fanana Banana, which is a Muslim women's art collective, who at that point was, they were doing things here and there, but really wanted to showcase some of their work in the Harbor District. And so that was one organization that really was able to showcase some of the work that they did and invite their community, the people that they are really connected to the Harbor District. And then also served as a bridge for some of our bigger organizations. So if you think Schlitz Audubon Nature Center, for example, where what was one of our program partners, typically they wouldn't do programming in this area unless they were really, working with a school or something more specific. We believe in accessibility, is making sure that the community here also has access to quality programming that's typically not in the inner city. So that's where we use the Schlitz Audubon, and it's great. It attests to how open they are to working with different communities as well. And then also this place has become really the highlight for Harbor Fest. And so Harbor Fest is our biggest festival, and it brings the greater Milwaukee community, and really with Sturgeon Fest this year, because we combined Harbor Fest with Sturgeon Fest, the greater, all of Wisconsin. And so again, this space has been, some of these images are from events for Summer in La Plaza, and a lot of these images are just images of people, on a weekend where we don't have events going on. And again, that speaks volumes to the fact that people are coming to use this space on their own. And we're hoping eventually, we still do some programming, but it becomes a space that's just open and always in use.
Yeah, I think Harborview Plaza is such a perfect example of how we engaged with the community from the inception of it, working with them through charrettes, actually creating the physical space, and then as Natalia just outlined, how to actually use the space. And so we use this as, our framework for how to continue to design public spaces within the district. And then the key here is that we're getting all of these people from Milwaukee, people that are that call the Harbor District home, and people outside of this area to come and see it, which is good for everybody, particularly our business district. And so the bid is, really happy when we get to see, above 3,000 people come in for an event. That's huge.
And then we're asking the businesses to also participate in this event. And that's been really a great partnership in that aspect. And, eventually as we grow and progress and have more public space, we're excited to be able to program those spaces as well, which leads us on to what our next space actually is.
And that is the extension of the Harbor Walk. So some of you might be familiar with this project. This is actually outlined in the wall-up, and it hits on the points that we've talked about already: equity and access. We want to make sure that people in the city and people particularly in the neighborhood have access to this waterfront. And it's been mentioned a couple times that this is a working waterfront, which it is. There are several parcels that will have waterfront access that use the water. And so, just to be thoughtful about how folks can move through that space and be safe, but it happens all the time in other cities, so we're happy to do that here. What we're currently looking at, these are a couple renderings of the stretch of Harbor Walk that's going to be developed next year, that stretches from Harborview Plaza all the way to the KK Bridge. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 9 miles of waterfront within the Harbor District. Currently, we have 0.13 miles or 670 feet built out, which we're very proud of. But what's even more exciting is that within the next year, we have probably about a mile coming online, which will be really impactful and significant. So as I mentioned, if we take a look at these images, the one to the right, actually you can see that play structure that Natalia highlighted on the last slide here. And we can see this really wonderful public space being developed. And this is a direct result of some survey work that Natalia did that she'll talk about here in a second. And this other rendering here, depending on how familiar you are with the space and with the river, there's a little inlet called the car ferry. And this, we have the opportunity to actually do some bridge work and get people even closer to the water. So we're really excited about what this space could be. This again is a rendering here. We're still in design and we're planning to go out to bid. The city is going out to bid with this project early next year. And I think I mentioned that we're working with Smith Group on that. They are the designers on this. So yeah, we are really excited to be part of this, both from the community engagement standpoint and from talking about aligning stakeholders. I also had the privilege to serve on the committee that worked with the design group on executing this design. And so I got to be that conduit that Natalia talked about earlier between the survey results, between all of our neighbors, and between the design group to make sure that things were progressing as directed. Yeah.
Yeah. And part of that, so this has been in the works for what, probably the last 4 months?
Yeah, 4 to 5 months.
4 to 5 months. But before that, it's the whole surveying that's getting done, right? And so this was an interesting way that we decided to go about creating the survey. We actually went to the Neighborhood Advisory Committee first. And so we invited them to a meeting with the city was there, Melony was there, and the NAC was there. And we talked about, well, first of all, this is what the project is, and this is the problem we're trying to solve. And I think that's very, very key to do at the beginning, because you need to make sure that anyone that you need to talk to or anyone that you need for the success of a project should understand exactly what it is that you're asking for. And I think many times we kind of, I think it's just become a practice that we explain what we know, we use terminology that we know, and not necessarily what everybody or the greater community will understand.
Yeah, we work with it every day.
Right.
And so we're very familiar with these projects and where they are. And so starting at square one, sometimes we skip that and we leave people behind when we do that.
Yep. And so once the NAC then was oriented on what it is that we're actually talking about, we asked them to actually shape the questions that would go onto the survey. So instead of us going to them and saying, hey, here's a survey, what do you want? It's like, no, we have to do a survey. Let's work together. You tell me what are the best questions to ask? What are the images that we should have in these in this survey going out to the greater public? And that's what they did. And they were very great about giving us their input on things that they would like and would not like, and questions that are needed to be asked, right? And so they took agency over that. And I say agency a lot because that's very important. As a location that's redeveloping and it's going to be constantly changing, you need to have some ownership over we were here and we understand what this place is and could be. And it provides some sort of interest as well, right? So we have our neighborhood advisory committee who's constantly checking in and being like, hey, how's this project doing? And they're actually caring for what's going on here. And also it's a thing that we call it's survey fatigue. So I'm sure many of you guys are constantly getting surveys, right? Survey about this and that. And this neighborhood specifically gets a lot of that, because there's so much improvement that needs to be done. They get a lot of those surveys saying hey, what do you think about this and that? And eventually you just don't want to take them anymore. And so when you can shape these surveys in the way that are speaking to the community, they're made from the community to the community. It just makes a difference in how the whole project gets developed. And it's really just been a positive impact. And I think that's what we're going to continue to do as we have new projects coming up in the future.
Yeah. And there are some themes from this survey that we at Harbor District Inc. can take forward into other public space projects. So again, we don't have to go out to the community every time we want the same question answered. We can take some of those themes and apply it to other projects. And so that we avoid some of that survey fatigue as much as possible.
Yeah.
It's a fine balance. So with that, I wanted you to share a little bit about this survey and actually how it was released and the results. So if you want to talk about that a little bit, because I think it speaks to our next point on measuring progress.
Yeah. So once the survey, we received a lot of input on this survey. I don't know if we necessarily, I think we had a goal of 500 respondents and we surpassed that by a lot, in the thousands. And so that was really great and it was wonderful. And then what we did after that with all that information, then the design team set up a series of renderings and kind of initial thoughts based on what the survey had. And we presented them at an event for Summer in La Plaza, so where we knew our community would be in. And then we also provided that information at Harbor Fest. And so we had a tent there specific to the Harbor Walk, and it was overlooking exactly where it is that this whole
that plaza that we showed.
Yeah, where the plaza is going to be at. And so that was great input session as well, because we had the greater community coming out and saying well, this is really great and this is not great. And that's kind of how we share that information. And we plan to be doing more of that and getting the NAC involved still throughout the process as we get to the final designs. Yeah, absolutely. So now that you've heard a little bit more about how we came to be and what we focus on, we'd like to share how we track that progress. A lot of times we, just like everybody else, can kind of get lost in the day-to-day, right? We are answering emails and phone calls just like everybody. And so it's important to us that we make sure that we are staying true to those outcomes that have been outlined by the stakeholders and by our plans and the framework for our entity. So we want to share with you, this is the actual spreadsheet that we use to track our progress. And this list is actually a sum of what we initially came up with. So we had a list of, I want to say it,
50, 70 items that we could track,
Yeah.
or that we wanted to track, or that would be ideal to track. And then we looked at, okay, well, we're 6 people, so let's be realistic about what we really think is going to make the biggest impact on how we track things. And so we came up with this list, which is built off of our program areas here. And so there's the things that you would expect that I talked about earlier, connecting the people, talking about the business community, talking about the natural environment. Something you might not expect is that we also track metrics around what it means to have a healthy workplace. Natalia alluded to that when she talked about how Katie, our office manager, helps us all the time on keeping on track and getting us organized. And so those are things that help boost our team morale, help with tenure and things like that. So we wanted to highlight just 3 of these, and you're welcome to ask questions on any of them, but we wanted to highlight these, and we will start off with Natalia.
Yeah. Okay, so I have the communication sector as well, and Katie works with me on this as well. I think with this, we realized, I think a little too late, that it's something, I think we had it in the back of our heads. We should be measuring, how many people are on our website. We should be measuring how many likes, follows, interactions, but it was never really put on paper, right? It was never put somewhere where we can actually go back and look at. And so this is why my portion really doesn't have any numerical data just yet. I can tell you what we have now, but I can't tell you what we had back in 2017 or 2014 when we first started. And so that's important to realize, okay, do your tracking sooner than later. And it's just it's a learning experience, right? Mm-hmm. So some things that we track would be our website traffic, and we do that through Google Analytics. I can say in the last year, we had 8.1 thousand visits to our website, which is really great. Especially because at one point, no one really knew who the Harbor District was or what we were doing. And now that just speaks to the fact that people know that we're here and they're looking interested for resources, right? And then we measure social media. So we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. We measure, what kind of posts are getting interacted with, what kind are not, who's following and who's liking, what kind of comments are we receiving, things like that. And to this point, I always say, if you're gonna be communicating on something through social media, it is okay to not be good at every social media that you're involved in, right? Because you need to think about the amount of time you want to invest, because you can really make, that's why there's positions specifically for, communications and social media. Us as a small organization, we don't have that position. So we need to think about, well, is Facebook getting us more interactions and more information than versus, let's say, Twitter or LinkedIn? And that's something that through measuring the sort of interactions we have, the likes, the involvement, I can decide, well, let's spend less time on this social media platform versus the other. Mm-hmm. And who knows, eventually, as we start to grow, we can tackle all of that. But again, just thinking about where we invest our time and where we invest things like paid advertisements. So when we do things like HarborFest, where we want to invite the greater community, our investment needs to go to the correct places. And then our newsletter subscribers as well. We have a newsletter that goes out typically once a month, and making sure that, hey, people are interested in the stories that we're giving out. And I don't have any newsletter subscriber, like I have the numbers, but I can say for sure that for every one unsubscribe, we have 5 subscribes, and that's something that I've been able to track since 2019. And that again speaks volumes to the fact that we're growing, people are interested. Yeah. People are invested in what the work is in the Harbor District.
Yeah, absolutely. Another item that we track, another metric, is our total assessed value. And so this is done, actually the city of Milwaukee provides this for us annually. And we look at this pretty heavily for the bid because this is how the bid is funded. And so you can see the numbers here, they pretty plainly speak for themselves. In 2017, we were, the area was valued at about 140 million. And this year we are over 265 million. So that 90% increase is incredible, really. And again, I think, speaks a lot to the work that's been done here, all of the work from all of our stakeholders that go into the district. And so, this is a real result of that. And this, how we use these types of metrics, again, I said this goes towards our budgeting for the bid, but this is also, you know, a flag that we can wave when we're trying to attract development here. We still have parcels left. There are always parcels ready for redevelopment. And so, you know, this is a really attractive number to get investors here. Now, another metric we wanted to share with you, you know, again, speaks to why it is so important to track things, because it tells you a lot. And so this came from our environmental director, and this is a percentage of our tree canopy. So the coverage in the district of trees, in case you're not familiar with that term. And you can see here that in 2010, we were at 10.4% coverage. And then this year, you can see that we have decreased by about 20%, a little under 20%, down to 8.4. So a little disappointing, but again, it's, you know, how are we going to take this number and inform our choices? So first thing, you know, how do we know what these numbers even mean? You know, is 10.4 good or bad, or what does that really mean for us? Especially when you take into consideration that we are an industrial area. We have an image for that later, so stay tuned. But when you think about our neighboring areas, you know, like Fox Point is at 64%, Whitefish Bay is at 51%. You know, so we're sitting here at 10, there's some room to improve. We're sitting here at 8.4 now, room to improve. The other piece that we want to make sure is highlighted here is that we might have seen this coming. So the reason for the decrease was that we recently had a couple large parcels redeveloped here that did have trees on them that needed to be scraped so that they could build what they needed to build. And there has been landscaping to replace that, of course, which is a requirement. However, we're not going to see the benefit of that canopy for several years, not to the mature level that these trees were at. And so, you know, if we would have been thinking ahead, if we were tracking these numbers, maybe we would have thought, hey, let's focus planting somewhere else in the district so that way we can keep our numbers at least where they are, knowing that this is coming. So something that we've talked about internally, looking into the future.
So Melony, you somewhat answered, my question was going to be, did some of the development impact the existing trees? But also I'd be curious if Aaron, did he map it in terms of location and other plantings besides trees? Because I do know that there's been bioswales added, other types of plants, which I know, especially in front of Freshwater Sciences, attracts butterflies and other habitats. So you might not have that data, but it's something that, you know, we might be mapping moving forward. So beyond the trees. So this is a good start.
Absolutely. And that goes back to that list that we were initially talking about, right? We had a list of, 70 items and, everything we can track, and it's, what is going to give us what's available. And so tree canopy is a pretty easily available mapped metric. And so that's why we've gone with this. But yeah, great point, especially on the bioswales.
There was another point in the chat just about did any disease like the emerald ash, like sometimes that impacts beyond our control or beyond development.
Absolutely. And I know that Aaron was very thoughtful. We just did a tree planting this last spring and was very thoughtful about what trees were planted to avoid those types of die-offs should a disease come through.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've seen a lot of the trees going in, so I'm looking forward to the 22 number.
Exactly. Yeah, we're going to keep bumping up. All right. And with that, we want to spend some time sharing with you what is next, what's on the docket. And first things first, I want to give ourselves a little pat on the back. Actually, the pat goes to our design team and to our stakeholders, of course. So this is, we got the 2021 President's Award for our work with site design on our Harbor Walk design guidelines. And we were thrilled to get the news that we got this because, as Natalia has shared with us, we really make sure that when we are putting together a document like this, that it's vetted not only with experts, but with the community. And so you can see a couple of the sections here and, how important it is to us when we're talking about that moment where, people are able to interact with the water, that there's the opportunity for ecological restoration as well. And so, removing some of the sheet piling in the area and restoring some of the natural shoreline is a priority, not only for residents, as you might expect, but also for business owners. That's on the bid board's list of priorities as well, which some of you might be surprised to hear. So kudos to the team on this. And on that note of guidelines, We actually have 2 more in the works. So we have sustainability guidelines that we want to put into effect, as well as a forestry plan, speaking to that earlier point of tree canopy and what we could be doing better in the district. We have these images in particular. The image on the left is a, 80, 100-year-old warehouse in Chicago that has actually planted their roofscape, which, we've all seen green roofs by this point, but what's unique about this one is that there are actual trees on it with no additional structural change needed to what was existing. So a lot of times, when you're involved in the design end of these types of projects, a feature or an amenity like this gets cut out because of the cost that it takes to really install this. And so there's been some progress on how we can actually, plant the roofs of these structures without that huge initial cost, which is really exciting for our district in particular, because we have a lot of buildings like this. So work to be done there. And then on the forestry plan side of things, there's a lot of detail to that, but this image to the right here, just talking about the importance of street trees. When we look at an image like this, we would hope to see in the future, when we talk about that 100-year mark, we'd hope to see that First Street looks very different and much more like this image than it does now. So our next project we are excited to share with you is a project that we are calling the West Bank. And again, we want to make sure that we are oriented. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we are in case you can't recognize it immediately. So this area right here where my cursor is the new Michaels development, the River One development here. This is Beecher. We've got Highway 94 right here. And then we have a Lincoln here to the south. This map is oriented north up. This area here is Lincoln Field. You may have driven past it about 1,000 times like I have and seen these tennis courts, but I never really noticed the river right here. And what is particularly unique to this stretch, especially in our district, is that it has a natural shoreline, which we are thrilled to bring some attention to by designing another part of the Harbor Walk. So that will stretch from Beecher to Lincoln, and you can get a better picture of that right here in the middle. This is if you're standing on Beecher looking south towards Lincoln. Really a beautiful, beautiful space. So we are thrilled to be able to bring the neighborhood and everyone in Milwaukee to this and show what an asset we have here. And speaking of assets, we need to protect them. So that's what this image here to the left is. This is actually a trash wheel that was installed in Baltimore. And you can see it doing its thing here. It's collecting all the trash. It goes through this little conveyor system and dumps into a dumpster. And so we have just actually gone under contract to manufacture a similar system here. And so we couldn't be more thrilled that it is in such a highly visible place. We're going to be investing in this Harbor Walk right next to it. Just really everything coming together, which again hits on that point of aligning stakeholders, because it sounds really easy when we present it like this, like, oh, it's all happening. But what's really going on behind the scenes is we have Milwaukee Rec that's redeveloping Lincoln Field, obviously the Harbor District. We have private landowners. We have the city of Milwaukee as an owner and a funder. And we have MMSD, who also owns land here and will be contributing to this project as well. So we have all of this work happening, plus there are adjacent projects. MMSD is also working on a project at this intersection just a little bit to the west. And so, again, Harbor District is serving as this conduit between all of these players in this space to make sure folks are understanding, everything that's happening here in case there are synergies or things that we can do to make things easier. If we're going out to the community for one project, can we go out for both of them so that we aren't having people come out multiple times to talk about a similar space? And then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
I was going to point out the same thing you were. So why don't you go ahead and talk about this image?
Oh, sure. So the image just to the right is, it's not necessarily the actual plan that we have, but it's just creating access again to the water. So we have the natural shoreline and making sure that we're not, building up a dock wall like that, a metal dock wall like we have everywhere else, or steel dock wall, but doing it in a way that's really out onto the water. And it's really great because there's sections where we can go out into the water and then have that experience there. And honestly, I mean, if you think about it, isn't it great for the community to feel, like, wow, this is my neighborhood. I have these really great assets in it. Who else can say, oh, I'm from Milwaukee, the south side where the trash collector is.
Right.
And that's really great. And all of these elements here allow for programming as well. And so when you have the trash collector, could there be something, garbage monster versus, versus students, right? So how much garbage can you collect and litter? And some of the other aspects like, more public space. Can you bring a class out to experience the Kinnickinnick River? So it's a variety of ways too that it's in the community interest as well.
Exactly. Definitely. Yeah. Very unique feature here for sure.
I'm going to jump in just for a second as a reminder. Also, I think we're still taking ideas for the name of the trash collector. So
We are
gathering. So if anybody has names, you can drop it in the chat, or again, I put a link in for the newsletter. There is a question about how Harbor District is measuring equity. And I will make one comment and then pass it to both of you.
Yeah.
One thing that we have done is we have an equity committee, and we utilize that committee to establish guidelines for hiring, for example. So when we did our most recent hiring for the planning director, we made sure that we had a diverse review committee and made sure that we had diverse candidates coming forward. And so we have a committee that will address on a case-by-case basis, but I know that there's other measurements that you're looking at in terms of reaching residents, the different school and youth. So I'll let you guys answer that question as well.
Yeah, and one of the measurements up there so I focus on the communications, but I have the connecting people to place, is we measure out zip codes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Each of our programming efforts that we have, what zip codes are coming in. If we find out, of course the space is open to everyone, but we want to make sure that our local, so 53204, the neighbor just west of us, are utilizing the space and are feeling included, and we're having programming that's, that they're going to come to. Like I always say, you could build a beer garden, but are the neighborhood kids going to come to that, right? And so that's one way that we're measuring. Okay, if our 53204 neighbors or our, a part of the Harbor District is in 53207 as well, if they're not coming, then that means our programming isn't right? So having those diverse programming and connecting with partners who already have those connections with the inner community, with that community, who we don't necessarily have access to yet. I think we're still fairly new. We're still building up that trust, and I'm constantly talking to people, but there's organizations and individuals who have been here for, doing work in the community for years and years before we even started. And so really depending on them, and again, going back to the neighborhood experts, our NAC, I think they're so important to the success of the work that we do here in the Harbor District. And even thinking about, the types of businesses that we want to allow into the Harbor District as well, and kind of like, speak for, and Melony will mention, more about more of the efforts that we're doing for that equity portion in regards to, investment and business coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, as you've heard, zip codes is how we track it. We track it through who we staff, both in our staff and on our boards. So we are tracking those metrics when it comes to equity and diversity. And yeah, there is room for us to start tracking. This is one of those elements that we need to start working on is in the business community, of new businesses here and existing businesses. Who are the minority owners, how are we making sure that they're being supported? So those are how we're currently tracking things, but we are definitely open to suggestions. If you have any, please feel free to put them in the chat.
No, I'll add another thing. Some of our school programming as well. We've been able to do programming with schools around the area, really within a mile of the Harbor District. And the part that I really enjoy is bringing those students out onto the water, because you'd be surprised the number of people who live in Milwaukee or in this neighborhood who have never even seen the rivers or the lake. And it's just, it's mind blowing, the fact that you can live here for so long and not know that this is here, or not experience, the waterfront,
or not feel welcome,
right? And, I can speak to that personally as, I grew up within a mile here and didn't realize, this Harbor District was here. I didn't realize the port was here. And so that's why, I make it a personal goal to make sure that, everyone, that I can reach as many people, we can reach as many people who don't have to experience that and can have access to this. So I think we're all on the same page where we understand that the equity is very important in making sure that it's accessible.
Yeah. Absolutely. So thank you for that question. Okay, so with that, one of our next projects that we're actually just kicking off, again, this is a City of Milwaukee project. They're funding it. Actually, I think WashDOT is funding it, but the city's running it, and they just selected Smith Group as the designer to fill in the missing links of the KK River Trail. The reason this is on a slide for us is because Smith Group asked us to work with them on their community engagement portion, which Natalia will talk about a little bit more here. But I wanted to just, again, orient you on what this project really is. I don't know if any of you have had the pleasure of riding your bike through the Harbor District, but it can be a little disjointed and downright unsafe. So the city recognizes that, we recognize that, we get feedback about that all the time from folks. And so the numbers on the map here, the 1, 2, and 3, highlight the areas that need to be improved, that need better connectivity, more safety, safety features. And so that's what we'll be working with Smith Group on in the beginning of the next year on connecting.
Yeah. And I just want to say, this is a great improvement for the city as well.
Yes.
Because that was a requirement for this request for, is it questions?
Qualifications.
Qualifications, there you go. On this RFQ, is that, hey, you have to work with someone who's really knowledgeable about, public management, who's really in there doing the work. And so if that continues on with other projects that the city is doing, I think that's a great asset.
Yeah, that they left room for the creativity as well. The way that they worded it here, they wanted to make sure that the design group was innovative and how they were reaching out to the community, again, to alleviate some of the survey fatigue and the irritation that we find sometimes when folks are asked the same question over and over. The city recognizes that as well and wants to make sure that we are, utilizing best practices on how to reach out and have the best projects.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we thought about and we're thinking of doing is, again, getting creative and making engagement really meaningful. And so we're looking at creating a stakeholder advisory committee, right? That's built through different experts, including our neighbors, who can really talk about this project. So, right, telling them, hey, this is a section that we're working on. What do you understand about it and what don't you, right? So going back to making sure that once we pull this out to the greater community, that they understand, the terms and what it is that we're exactly talking about, right?
What's unique for us on this project is that this is actually a lot of people that are expert in this are coming from outside of our district, right? So people that are biking in from other neighborhoods, and those are the folks that we want to make sure that we're also capturing their feedback as the main users of this trail.
Yep. And I'm not a bike expert. I don't know if Melony is.
No.
Okay, so we're not the bike experts, and this is where we depend on our other groups outside of just the Harbor District stakeholders and entities. So we think of people like the Wisconsin Bike Fed, or even local bike businesses, right? So on Lincoln Avenue, we have Ben Cycle, and they can reach out to the greater community that we're really looking at input from. And that's, again, bringing all of these people together and making sure that we have the correct people at the table and that they're pretty much leading that discussion. We're just kind of asking them how.
Yeah. Now, Natalia mentioned that part of this project is putting together the stakeholder advisory committee, which I'd say is pretty standard at this point. But what's unique about the way that we're approaching it is that we're making sure that these folks that are putting their time in are going to be compensated for that with money, because we appreciate the time that it takes for people to volunteer and give us their time and opinion.
Is there a question? Yes. Who in the city put out the RFP? I believe they're specifically talking to the River Trail project, and who is managing which department?
Great question. It is Kate Riordan. I'm not sure her.
So that's the bike and ped. That's through DPW.
There you go.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. And then there were a couple suggestions. I'm keeping notes, but there's suggestions for, tracking sort of the equity aspect is. And I don't know how you would do this other than maybe a survey, but I know you've been tracking how many people are posting social media that weren't prior, that live in the neighborhood. But there's a suggestion you could, in a survey, ask who living in a mile feels comfortable walking to the water. And then the next question is, how many of you have walked to the water in the last year, right?
Right.
So there's a difference between being comfortable and actually doing it. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I love the simplicity of those questions too, right? Because I think we get into the mindset of all these other things, and people, the simpler the better at times.
And what are you really trying to get at?
Right.
Yeah, are people actually doing the thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay to be direct and clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Thank
thank you
you.
for that suggestion.
Okay, anything else on KK River Trail? I don't think so. Okay. So the next two items we're going to discuss, these are our last two items for today. And this is a really, really important one to us. And that is stewardship. So the Harbor District Harbor District Inc. has really stepped up in this area. We are now managing 9 acres of space. And what that actually means is that, collecting litter, removing invasive species, which you see in this middle picture, and then ideally planting native plants, which you see in the final picture here. This takes a ton of work. It's also a great opportunity. So we do have a lot of corporations in the district that are constantly looking for volunteer opportunities, and we are sharing with them over and over. Please have your folks organize. We'll get you some garbage bags and go pick up some trash, because if it's falling in the district, it will eventually get to the river, and we don't want to see that. So stewardship is a huge piece of our work currently, and it's only going to continue to grow. So as we've been talking about, adding these different stretches of Harbor Walk, adding other public spaces, this responsibility is only going to continue to grow. And so we are thinking now about how to continue to support that with staff and with grant funding. All right. And lastly, we wanted to share our newest idea with you. And that is the idea of a project review board. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the term like an architectural review board or a design review board, and that is really the mechanism through which we would build this. So that way we could, go through the city and, dot our I's and cross our T's. That's the mechanism we'd use. But here at the Harbor District, we are less concerned with paint color and design details than we are with really making sure we're protecting the work that's already been done. We've discussed many times all the work that's gone into, gathering stakeholder input, that's gone into creating these large plans. And so that, you take that on top of like the actual dollar investment that's been made in real estate. If we go back to the numbers that we discussed on the assessed value, that's a ton of investment in this area. And we want to make sure that that's protected. So our thought around this is, if we have a board that is able to review projects that come in and checking these 4 boxes, so to speak, that really helps get us closer to that. So when we say here intent, we mean just that. Have you met the intent of the wall-up? Have you met the intent of the forestry plan, of the sustainability plan? Have you actually thoughtfully looked through these plans and addressed them somehow in your site plan and in your plans in general? Next is community. I think we've, talked about that over and over, how important and critical that is. We want to make sure that development that's coming in has been vetted. Sustainability, obviously that touches on the plans that we've talked about, but there are other ideas. So we want to make sure that people have some flexibility to be able to present on that individually. And then lastly, character. So in the district, if you're familiar, there are lots of different design styles and lots of different features. And so we are there to be a sounding board for that, but not in any way that's going to be oppressive. So we're really excited about this as an opportunity to protect the investment that's been made here. So that is what we have to show you today on what's next. Thank you so much for your time, and we are happy to answer any other questions you might have.
So thank you both. Very informative and exciting. I mean, it's always good to be reflective and look back at what have we actually done, what's the impact, but then really get people excited to be champions to move forward. So great success there. A couple comments. Somebody was asking about the beach, the Toronto beach, and bringing that in. Are there any plans? I don't know if there's plans along the Riverwalk. The Eco Office did accept ideas just outside the Harbor District where Water Street turns into First Street, but there were a lot of concerns about maintenance and sort of beyond capacity. So is there any discussion of an actual beach?
There is not a current plan, but we have a couple ideas of where it could be possible. So we continue to work with owners on how to make those types of visions work for them and their property, but nothing specific yet.
Keep it on a wish list, right?
Absolutely.
I don't know if Aaron is still on. This might be more for Aaron, but there's this question about what are the major environmental issues in the district right now and how are they being mitigated, such as the fluctuating water levels, environmental contamination, nutrient overload. I know there's lots of discussions in our environmental committee on that. Do you want to address that, or I don't know if Aaron is still here. Aaron, if you're
I'm here,
here.
Carolyn. Yeah.
Excellent.
Really good question, because it puts in context the larger landscape. So there are certain things that affect the district that are coming downstream that we can't, there's not a whole lot that we can do other than advocate for, and there's certain things we can control. So that's a really good question. I think things like the contaminated sediment that the area of concern is working to remediate over the next decade or so, water quality issues, it's part of being part of these large regional coalitions is the only way to get at these big issues.
Okay. I know on a smaller scale, you've been doing the habitat hotels to increase the amount of habitat.
Yeah.
But those are small scale. I don't know if you want to talk briefly about some of your smaller scale interventions.
Yes. So some of our smaller scale things like the Habitat Hotel project are sort of demonstration projects and experiments. One of the ideas we've been kicking around is kind of a urban aquatic habitat field lab where we can try out different retrofits to our steel dock walls that add some ecological functioning of that old marsh back when Melony and Natalia started the presentation, not when they started here. To bring some function back to this kind of dead landscape that we've engineered out. So that's one thing, as well as mapping where do we have green spaces? Where do we have natural shorelines? How do we connect these into a network that living things besides people want to be here, where it can serve those needs? How do we encourage in guidelines native landscaping, which is not super sexy, but that's how we rebuild a food web, is plants that feed insects, that feed birds, and building that richness back in. It's a great challenge, interesting challenge.
Thank you. And I agree, some of this is beyond our reach, but we want to be one of the voices and the partners. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, I'll take this moment to remind everybody that we're going to take a little holiday break from the Innovative Cities lectures, but we will be back. February 8th will be the next one, and Jenny will be sending out emails after the holidays and giving you all the future dates and topics that will be included. So we're looking forward to seeing everybody back. The goal for us is that we will do a hybrid. So we will have in person, but we will be doing a video live stream at the same time. I know there's been interest, at least from our students, wanting to be in person for these lectures. We're in person for most of our classes, but we know our numbers are much higher as we're virtual. It's much more accessible than having to park at UWM, right? So if there are no other questions or comments, I really appreciate it. And I just put in the chat, those people wanting to know when are all the events coming up. Maybe not many now in winter months, but the newsletter is the link I put in there. Do you have other suggestions for how people can be aware of what's happening at the Harbor District?
Just follow our social media, really. There's a lot of bits and pieces that we put in there that really talk about everything in our collective work that we do. So I would just, do that. And at our events, we typically have things that we need input on or conversations.
Sign up sheets.
Projects. Yeah.
Lots of ways to volunteer as well. We have lots of
Absolutely.
volunteers. So, all right. So thank you so much for everyone spending part of your day with us and learning more about, I think, which is the next great redevelopment. We had the Valley many years ago in the city, and the Harbor District is sort of that next big transformation that we're seeing. So thank you to Melony and Natalia for sharing your time as well and your expertise. And Aaron, thanks for chiming in.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye,
Have a good
everybody.
day. Bye.